On a windswept hill in southern Turkey stands a temple that, according to everything we thought we knew, should not exist. It is a ring of towering stone pillars, carved with astonishing skill, and it is unimaginably old. Not hundreds of years old. Not thousands. This temple was built 11,600 years ago. To put that in perspective, it is 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramids. 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It was already ancient when the first city on Earth was built. And that is where the mystery begins. Because when this temple was raised, humanity had none of the things you need to build it. There was no writing, no metal, no wheel, no farming, no cities, nothing. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers, wandering bands who chased wild herds and gathered wild plants, exactly as humans had for tens of thousands of years. They had no kings, no towns, no writing to plan with. By every rule of history, they could not have built something like this. And yet, there it stands. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, in Turkish, the Hill of the Belly. For thousands of years, it was just a low mound in the middle of nowhere. In 1994, an archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt came to survey it. Others had dismissed the hill as a forgotten medieval graveyard. He saw something else. Just beneath the surface, his team found the tops of enormous carved pillars. And the deeper they dug, the more impossible it became. They uncovered vast circles of standing stones, some of the pillars taller than a house and heavier than a truck. Each pillar was shaped like a giant letter T, and carved into the hard stone were animals, brought to life with breathtaking skill. Foxes, boars, and cranes. Scorpions and vultures. Snakes pouring down the stone like water. And the great T-shaped pillars themselves were not just stones. Carved arms bent along their sides, hands meeting at the front. They were beings, towering, faceless figures watching over the circle. But the deepest mystery was not what they carved. It was how and why. Consider the pillars. The largest weigh as much as 50 tons, quarried from solid limestone. They were cut from the bedrock using nothing but stone tools, then somehow moved and raised upright, with no metal, no wheels, and no animals to pull them. Raising a single pillar would have taken hundreds of people, working together for weeks. And Göbekli Tepe holds not one pillar, but dozens, in ring after ring after ring. For scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, this was a staggering, almost unbelievable feat of organization. So the question that has haunted archaeologists ever since is simple. Why? Why would people with no cities and no farms pour everything into building this? The answer, when it came, quietly rewrote the story of human civilization. Because Göbekli Tepe was not a town. No one lived here. There are no houses, no hearths, no signs of daily life. It was a temple, a sacred place, built not to live in, but to gather, and to worship. And that shatters the oldest assumption we had about ourselves. For a century, the story went like this. First, humans learned to farm. Farming gave us food, and villages, and free time. And only then, once we were comfortable, did we build temples and invent religion. Göbekli Tepe suggests we had the story backwards. Here, the temple came first, thousands of years before farming. The urge to build something sacred came before the fields, before the towns, before it all. Some scholars believe it may even have happened the other way around, that the effort of building and feeding the crowds who gathered here is what pushed people to farm in the first place. In other words, it may not have been bread that built civilization. It may have been belief. But the strangeness of Göbekli Tepe does not end there, because of how it ended. After more than 1,000 years of use, the people did something no one can fully explain. They buried it. Deliberately, by hand, they filled the entire temple with rubble and soil until the great pillars vanished completely beneath the hill. It was this burial that preserved it so perfectly for 11,000 years. But it left us with a haunting question. Why hide something you worked so hard to build? We may never know. Perhaps the temple had served its purpose. Perhaps a belief had died, or a new one had been born. And carved onto the stones may be a clue to what these people feared. On one pillar, known as the vulture stone, a strange scene unfolds. A great vulture, strange symbols, and a headless body. Some researchers believe it records a real event, a swarm of comet fragments striking the Earth, plunging the world into a sudden, deadly cold. It is a bold and hotly debated idea, but it hints that these were not simple minds. They watched the sky, they remembered, and they carved what they saw into stone to last forever. Everything we assumed about these people, that they were primitive, scattered, incapable, Göbekli Tepe quietly proves wrong. They organized hundreds of people. They quarried and raised 50-ton stones. They created art that still stops us in our tracks. And they did it all before the very first brick of the first city was ever laid. Today, only a fraction of the site has been uncovered. Beneath the hill, scanners reveal more great circles still waiting in the dark. Whatever else Göbekli Tepe is still hiding, it has already changed us. It moved the birth of the sacred back to the dawn of our species. It tells us that long before we built homes for ourselves, we built a home for our gods. That the first great thing our ancestors chose to create was not a shelter, or a wall, or a weapon. It was a place to kneel, and to wonder. 11,000 years later, on that same lonely hill, the great stones still stand. Silent. Watching. And still keeping most of their secrets.